All right. Welcome, everyone. I want to thank you for joining today's live stream, whether you're watching on Zoom or Facebook Live. This is my last official event for IABC Houston as the president of the chapter, and I just want to thank everyone for being along on this ride. It's been quite the journey. In the past year, we've launched a mentorship program. We were named International Chapter of the Year. We've shifted quite well to virtual events amidst the COVID-19 pandemic, and it has been an absolute joy to work with each and everyone here. I do miss networking in person, and hopefully we can do that again in the near future. But with that said, none of this would be possible without our board of directors and our diamond partner, Pierpont Communications. Thank you all for taking the time to join us for lunch today. You could have been anywhere else. You could have joined a number of other webinars, but instead you chose to join us for this discussion, and it's one that we're really excited about. Really quickly, before we get into the discussion, I do want to give a reminder on a few upcoming events that we have with IABC Houston, both of which take place on July 9th. First, Todd Gregory, who is actually on the call right now, is hosting a coffee break, which is part of our members only Networking 9 series. This will take place at 9 a.m. and will focus on communications planning and execution. And later that afternoon, our eSig meeting will feature a great panel on 4 paths to getting published. And you can register for both virtual events on our website, iabchouston.com. Next, if you haven't done so already, I want to encourage you to vote for the 2020-2021 board slate. You should have received an email about this last week from IABC Houston. Voting closes in just a few days, and on July 1st, Haley Ross is set to take the lead of the chapter with Amanda Swinez in line as president-elect. And I know they're absolutely going to crush it in their roles, and I can't wait to see what they accomplish in the years to come. And last but not least, I do want to plug the Business Communicators podcast. Courtney, who we have on today's webinar, she will be a guest on our show, which drops next Wednesday at 6 a.m. And we're going to do a little giveaway. So I've got a Google Nest Mini. So if you want a free Google Nest Mini, here's what you have to do. You've got to go to our iTunes page, search Business Communicators, leave a 5-star review and a comment. And then if you do that, you send me the screen cap of the comment and you email it to podcast@iabchouston.com. I'll compile all of the names and we'll use random.org to pick a winner for the Google Nest Mini. So if you can do that, we'll give you 2 weeks. So if you can submit that by July 8th, we'll pick a winner on July 9th and we'll notify those individuals. So if you want a free Google Nest Mini, take advantage of this opportunity. All right. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into today's webinar. On behalf of the IABC Houston chapter, I'm excited to welcome Courtney Phillips as our guest for today's fireside chat on mental health. During our conversation, we'll focus on her personal story, her advocacy efforts, the role of corporate communications and how it plays in creating a culture of care, and so much more. And as a reminder, we want this session to be as interactive as possible. So if you're watching on Zoom, please feel free to ask a question in the chat box or the Q&A tool. We'll see those and we'll integrate those as we go on throughout this discussion. If you're watching on Facebook Live, please drop a question in the comment section and we'll try to get to as many as we can throughout the conversation. Again, we want this to be as interactive as possible. Now, a little bit more about Courtney. She has more than 14 years of strategic communications and public relations experience across the federal government, healthcare, and corporate sectors. Courtney is also a mental health warrior and spends her time advocating in the community and sharing stories of hope, healing through her own initiative, Hope for Invisible Wounds. And it provides resources and tools for those that are suffering from mental anguish. Courtney is currently Miss Northern Virginia for America and is competing in July for the Miss Virginia crown. She previously held the title of Mrs. District of Columbia International 2019 and placed in the top 15 at the Miss International pageant. And Courtney competes in pageants to help facilitate and bring a larger audience to her philanthropic efforts. And Courtney, that was a mouthful, but thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you for having me. Do I get to enter the Google winning thing? Like, I would love to win that.
Yeah, I would definitely encourage you to leave a 5-star review and a comment, and we'll let random.org do it. I'll film it all so everyone knows that it is not, catered, and I'm not just giving you a free Google Nest. But Courtney, thank you so much for joining. And, advocating for mental health is a passion of yours. Why is that, and is there a personal connection?
Absolutely. So I actually had a very traumatic childhood. And it started out, I lost my mother when I was young, and I suffered from years of childhood abuse, and then watched my dad suffer from PTSD and alcoholism. And then very early in my adulthood, lost him. And ultimately, what happened is I started suffering from my own mental health issues. Since then, I've been on the road to recovery, working through healthy coping mechanisms and finding proper care. And with pageants and finding my voice, as well as being a professional communicator, I've been able to share my story and have an impact on others. And ultimately, with Hope for Invisible Wounds, I've been able to start sharing other people's stories and kind of give a voice to the voiceless, and kind of amplify this message of overcoming to help people know that there's kind of a light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's great work that you're doing. And again, you're active in pageants and you've made mental health your advocacy platform. Since you started Hope for Invisible Wounds, you've had the opportunity to do some really incredible work and, interesting things like representing a global mental health organization at the United Nations General Assembly. What have these experiences been like for you?
I mean, it's really surreal. And to be honest, the UN experience, I mean, besides the fact that a girl from small town Louisiana was at the UN, that actually isn't the most interesting story. I was able to be featured in Thrive Global for my story. I've been featured in a documentary. But my most interesting one was actually they turned me into a comic book hero as a shiro. And not many people get to say that. But I actually missed getting to do the signing at Comic-Con because of the pandemic.
That's really unfortunate. I think that's every child's dream, to be a comic book hero. So congratulations on that. And hopefully you get to go to Comic-Con and actually do that in, the near future when things start to return to normal. But, growing up for me, I played baseball. If I got hurt, I was always told to rub some dirt on it. I'm pretty sure there are a lot of people that have been told that growing up as well. But as an adult, I realized that society basically labeled mental health as sort of a taboo subject. And it was never really anything that people discussed, at least until recent years. And we've started to see that shift. And, now it's more okay to express our feelings and discuss these issues because ultimately they impact us, they impact our family, and they impact our colleagues. Why is it that we've seen mental health issues become more acceptable to discuss in our society?
Honestly, I think there's been a cultural shift, and I think the media has really helped to facilitate that. We're starting to hear stories of healing across the board from celebrities and influencers. We have people like Demi Lovato and Lady Gaga coming out and telling their stories of seeking care. They're telling their stories of struggle, but they're also telling their stories of getting better. But then we're also seeing the bad side of people who didn't get better, like Anthony Bourdain and Robin Williams. And we're actually hearing about this mental health epidemic, and we're seeing that, change really needs to happen.
Yeah, I think Tony Bourdain really hit me close to home. Also Avicii. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with him, but he was a DJ. Really incredible person. And it's just really unfortunate to see, what happens sometimes to people that struggle with mental illness. But, I think I've also always confused mental illness with mental health. I've confused the two terms. I had never really personally experienced mental health issues until COVID-19 and the lockdown. For me, social distancing and being in lockdown was incredibly difficult. I had depression. I felt alone at times. And with COVID-19, the economy that is suffering, social unrest so prevalent in our society today, many are experiencing the same. In fact, I think Mental Health America published a stat that said that 1 out of every 5 American adults will have a diagnosable mental health condition in any given year. That's alarming.
Absolutely. So to reference the first part of your statement, mental wellness is really your state of being. Sometimes we go through stress with our mental wellness, and sometimes we're working on it, and it's more of a positive, fluid state. Mental illness is actually your clinical conditions, the things that we're talking about, like anxiety or depression or substance abuse. And then the second part of what you were talking about, COVID-19 and the different things that we've been confronted with, isolation, the fears of your job being on the line and job stability, economic instability, and all of the different things that have been going on in our nation in general have been causing mental illness and mental health conditions. And we've actually seen a 34% rate of anxiety and depression across America. And the Census Bureau put that number out, and it's compared to 17% last year at this time.
Wow. That's incredible. And not in a good way. I think that we can do more as a society to help mitigate some of these risks. And it's just that those numbers are extremely alarming. All right, so we have a few questions that have come through on Zoom, and we haven't had any yet on Facebook. But again, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in. We're going to get to some of these really quickly. But I also want to be cognizant of what is going on in society today. This month, we've had social unrest due to police brutality. It's also Pride Month. And when you look at the data, Black Americans are 20% more likely to experience mental health problems than the rest of the population. And 37% of the LGBTQ plus community is impacted by mental illness. Mm-hmm. Again, those are alarming numbers. So in addition to being an ally and supporting our neighbors, what resources can we offer as communications professionals to help mitigate these numbers?
Well, obviously we want to be responsive to the fact that we're two white people sitting here having this conversation. Yeah. But the one thing that I noticed and everything that I wanted to make sure I brought to the table in this conversation was across the board that a lot of clinicians will oftentimes try to treat their patients consistently the same, regardless of the background that they're coming from. They try to treat the diagnoses the same. So trying to find a clinician that will look at your background, whether it's your sexual identity, your gender identity, or your race, and you can do that by the way that you research whenever you're looking on your insurance, or sometimes Psychology Today will have those different check boxes that you can look at. And then the second thing that I always tell everyone whenever they're looking for a new clinician is to do an interview and make sure that there's a fit with that person. And so especially for these diverse communities, it's really important that you find a fit. So having that conversation before you go in and make a commitment with someone, and that they have that cultural sensitivity.
That's great advice. We've covered this at a high level so far when it comes to mental health, but let's take a look at the comms side. So many of us on this call, we're in comms, marketing, PR. Many of us have witnessed our own businesses start to take notice of the importance of self-care and mental health, whether it's, town hall meetings, offerings, guidance, and resources. We're starting to see this culture of care actually emerge in the workplace. So as communicators, how can we work with our leadership to encourage buy-in on these topics so that we can ensure that our staff is equipped with the proper resources so they can ultimately bring, their best selves to work?
I think the number one thing that we need to make sure that leaders at all levels, whether it's lower level supervisors all the way up to executives, understand is that when mental health starts suffering, job performance suffers, employee engagement suffers, all the way to physical health. They know that when your mental health starts suffering, your physical health starts suffering. So if we can encourage them to start promoting mental wellness, and that starts with promoting work-life balance. So right now, when we're in social isolation, and let's face it, it kind of sounds like from the news that Houston might be going right back into quarantine. We need to encourage our leaders to encourage their employees to take breaks during the day. I know when you and I were talking offline, we were talking about some of the interesting things that some of the companies that you've been talking to have been doing. I know that some of the companies that I've worked with have done virtual coffees. Some things that are really helpful is setting self-time, for your own self, setting breaks, but being cognizant of the need to be flexible. We're about to go back into having to teaching our own kids and having to have a full-time job. Leaders need to be understanding of the need to be flexible. And we also have this other thing, mental health days. I don't know how many companies are understanding of mental health days and needing to treat them the same as sick days. That's something else that we need to be promoting to our leadership.
Absolutely. So we've got a few questions coming in. This one is going to be from Amanda. She asked, how do you offer support or intervene without crossing a line or getting in someone's business, which can be really tricky in a professional setting?
I think in a professional setting, it depends on the relationship that you have with the individual. If it is 100% a coworker, I would often lend more towards offering support in the sense of, are you overwhelmed? Do you need support? And helping them prioritize their workload, or the things that we were talking about with flexibility, like offering them that type of level of support. Also, you have to reference the signs and symptoms. If you're realizing someone might potentially be in severe need or in a severe state, such as like suicidal, then that might be something different where you do need to step over the line.
And kind of on that note, we have a lot of, people that are members of IABC Houston that are entrepreneurs, many owning their own agencies or working from themselves. What resources are out there to ensure that, they're also taking care of their mental health and discussing these issues when they don't necessarily have, some of these corporate resources?
So that's great. There's some really awesome apps that provide on the minute. You can text, you can call, you can FaceTime with therapists. Two of the better known ones are Talkspace and BetterHealth, and they are around the range of like $45 a week, which is significantly cheaper than going to a therapist in person. And some people's insurance providers will pay for them. There's also some sliding scale therapists based on your income level. And there's also community-based free mental health services that you can research in your local community. And then you can also look into peer support groups. Most of those are even able to find on Facebook based on the different things that you're struggling with.
So I've got a few questions rolling in, so I'm trying to keep up. We've got an anonymous question, and it says, how do you incorporate wellness and mental health into the corporate culture and communications plans when your SVP for HR has said they, quote, don't believe in empathy? And they wanted to emphasize that this was a direct quote.
Okay. I feel like I'm in a pageant interview all of a sudden on my toes. I think that the most important thing is to try to reference back to what I was saying about how whenever mental health suffers, you start suffering in employee engagement, and you start suffering in performance, and then physical health starts suffering, and then that's when people start having sick days, and you start missing things. Maybe you're missing client deliverables if you have clients that you deliver to, or depending upon what your line of business is. So I think that's where you reach someone, especially at that level. They may not be empathetic to the mushy-gushy side of people's feelings, but if you start talking to them in a business bottom line way and tell them, this is the impact. If we don't support our employees in this way, this is what we're going to be losing.
With these more difficult subjects, there's a lot of scrutiny that goes into making sure that the message does come across as empathetic, and that it is coming from a place of care. When we are, penning some of these messages for, maybe it's our leaders, maybe it's our, internal communications, maybe it's a Yammer post, what are some tips and strategies to go about, navigating that message development?
I mean, I think that it should always come from the heart. I feel like it should always be genuine. But if someone doesn't have that empathy, you have to kind of come from your own place. We're all communicators. So you try to think about your audience. I mean, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here, but I always try to think about who's it's landing with. So if I'm writing a message to somebody who might be struggling with depression or anxiety, I try to think about how this message is going to land with them. You wouldn't be telling them something that they already know, or something that would isolate them or make them feel even more isolated. That's the way that I would always try to say it. One thing that I always heard was, don't we yourself to death. I think that's an Anne Wiley saying. So you don't want to come at them from above. This is what we're telling you to do. You want to be more, we're listening to you, but not we, and come across in that way.
How do you actually listen? And, you know, because I don't know, that's one of the frustrating things is that I find, at least, is when you are, you know, it takes a lot to be able to open up to somebody and to share your story. It's courageous to be able to do that. And sometimes I think when you're listening, it can put you in an uncomfortable situation.
As a listener?
Yeah, as a listener, how do you navigate that from, you know, a listener, a supporter, an ally perspective?
So taking it out of the corporate setting,
Right.
I mean, I might have the natural empathy gene, but I have a tendency to just try to ask questions, and I try to connect without sharing myself. What people tend to do when they start getting anxious is they start telling things about themselves or stories to try to connect. So when someone says, you know, I had a traumatic childhood, oh, you know, I had something traumatic happen to me, because it's a natural, you want to fill the space and you want to connect. But sometimes it's just asking more questions and allowing that person to share more, and just being in that space with them will let them open up, and asking the questions, you know, how can I be here for you, and what can I do for you?
Yeah, I think that's really important, especially I think if you can relate to the person. You know, maybe I'm not the one giving advice on, you know, mental health, but maybe it's, I don't know, something, you know, comms related. If I can find a story that I've personally gone through and use that to kind of empathize and support them, you know, with that listening, I think that can go a long way in helping. Is that a fair statement?
It is. I just would warn not to talk over their story.
Right.
I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Take the back seat when it comes to this. All right, we've got a few more questions that have come in. Also, some great links have been shared in the chat for resources. Again, I would encourage you, if you've got any comments, questions, drop them in the Q&A, drop them in the chat. We'll get to as many as we can. This one comes from anonymous attendee, and they ask, what are your top 3 self-care suggestions, both when life is normal and now during this pandemic when some of the usual self-care options may not be open or available?
Okay, so I love this one. First of all, for those who may not know, I have run into this a few times. Some people think self-care is going to the spa, getting a massage, or getting your nails done. That is not what self-care is. Self-care is making sure that you are taking care of yourself. I always like to say that you can't pour from an empty cup. And that's why when you're on the airplane, when they tell you that whenever the oxygen drops down, to put your oxygen on first. So whenever I look at self-care in a non-pandemic time, for me, it's making sure that I maintain my normal routine. So I get up every morning at 4:30 and go to SoulCycle, and I journal and I meditate before work. And that sets my day. I've already on the way. Whatever happens in the day, I've already taken all my stresses out. So obviously I'm not going to SoulCycle right now. And it kind of like jolted me. I'll be honest, I kind of had to reset. During quarantine, some of the things that I had to do a little bit differently is I actually did order a bicycle, and I am still doing spin classes here, but that's a different thing. I have still get up every morning early before work. I still get up and I go for long walks with my dog. I still meditate, and I have made it a important thing to connect with someone every day, because I'm not touching anyone. I live alone. So I'm having a FaceTime every day, and I know everyone's kind of tired of the Zoom, but with someone who's really important to me.
I think that's incredibly important. That's something that has gotten me by a little bit during this time. I know that everyone kind of embraced like the Zoom happy hours when the quarantine started, but for me, especially during COVID-19, those were literally the highlights of my week. Being able to drop on a call with friends from throughout the world, and some of these calls would start at like 9 p.m. and end at 3 or 4 in the morning, and it was just so much fun. We would do theme nights. We did like a prom, like a 90s beach party. And for me, that was always something to look forward to, even when, I felt isolated. And so I would definitely encourage you to find a community. I think a community is incredibly important to get through challenging times. Courtney, for you personally, how has, a community supported you and kind of navigating some of your experiences?
So I have several communities. I have my family in Texas, and then I have the few friends that I've made in the DC area, but I have this amazing sisterhood of pageant friends from all over the country, from going to nationals last year and from being in pageants. And we have a Marco Polo group that there's like a ton of us on, and we talk nonstop all day, every day. And it's been like that since we left nationals. And I feel like we never went into quarantine as far as that group. And so anything that we've gone through, we go through it together. And so that's been really nice. But actually I came back to Texas for a month and quarantined on the beach with my family because I needed to like get out of my little apartment in Arlington. So I 100% know the value of being surrounded by people that care about you.
Yeah, be around loved ones if you can. I think that's one of the most important things, especially during difficult times. It's always great to have that support network when you're going through a challenging moment in your life. And there are resources out there. Courtney, you said this many times, but it's really important to know that you're not alone during this battle. Keep that in mind. And again, we've got resources that were dropped in the chat box. We'll also include a few resources at the end of this conversation. But we have another question that came in, and this is comms focused. How do you measure success in a comms plan that includes or focuses on mental health wellness campaigns? Thinking of, protected health information, how do you know if people have changed their behavior or if you've been successful? And I think that's really important because measurement KPIs, they're so important on showing that we're actually delivering results. How does that kind of work in?
I think it would relay back to the same way that we measure in any of our communications plans, behavior change. I would try to stay away from any kind of conversations where I like kind of what I talked about with you, Austin. I can't really venture into any kind of client conversations of stuff that I've worked on. But it's going to be the same as anything that you've done. So any way that you've measured your communications, whatever tools that you use within your workspace, it's going to be very similar. However you're measuring your behavior change.
Yeah, I think maybe confidential surveys is probably one of the best routes in this situation. I don't have a lot of experience in it, but that would probably be my approach. I think people need to feel that their information or experiences aren't going to be shared more widely. So I think there's like that trust level that really has to go into it. So I think if you're a trusted communicator, that goes a long way. I've got a question from another anonymous attendee. How do you balance doing pageants and supporting your platform with work? And they added, pageants seem kind of high maintenance, ?
So pageants and work is always a priority, obviously. I will say, Austin and I were sending emails at 2 a.m. So I do my pageant business outside of business hours. And I'm in pageant prep right now, so that has a little bit to do with the late hours. But it's a passion of mine, being in the community. Last year, I did over 150 community service hours alone, and that wasn't doing Hope for Invisible Women's work. Pageant women, that's the way that we are. I don't know if you've ever met anyone else or had anyone else on the podcast, but that's just kind of it's just kind of in our bones. I've been doing this since I was about 17 years old, so it just kind of comes naturally to me. And as far as the high maintenance nature of it, it's just who I am. If I wasn't going to work in stilettos with like my hair extensions, I don't know that I would know who to be.
I definitely don't go to work with hair extensions, as many of you can see on the chat. But shockingly, you're not the only pageant participant that we've had for IABC Houston or on the Business Communicators podcast. Some of you might recall, I believe it was last August, we had Amanda Kane, who works in communications healthcare in Nashville. She shared her story on recovering when you make a mistake. It was incredibly great session that she had here in Houston, also on the podcast. So if you're interested in checking that out, go over to the Business Communicators and kind of hear her story as well. But she provides great insights. All right, so we've got another question that came in from Nancy. And this is, there are polarizing views of mental illness, wearing a face covering, views about Black Lives Matter, etc. What are tips for increasing your ability to remain calm and rational in conversations about these volatile topics?
So I actually had a conversation with a friend who was in the middle of the riots. Her house was in the middle of the riots in Chicago, and talking with her the other day about how to maintain calmness in case she needed to escape quickly. And I'm going to defer to like the same exact thing. There's something that you have to do whenever you're starting to have a panic attack. It could be in a situation where you're at a table with an executive and you're about to give a presentation, or you need to have a conversation where your blood's starting to boil because your opinion is different than others, or like in the situation where I was just referencing. There's different tools and tips, and we can send them out like Austin was saying, but one that's really important is grounding, that you can do very, very quickly. It's like there's a graphic that we can send out, but you find 5 things that you can see quickly, and you note them, and then there's 4 things that you can touch, and then you work your way down. 3, 2, 1. There's also breathing technique. And then there's also a technique called tapping, where you tap areas on your body. So all those things can bring you down within 30 seconds or less. Those things, whenever you start to feel yourself rising, bring you down and bring your blood pressure down and help you to think clearly. I've been able to do them because I suffer from panic attacks. So they're things that I reference in my head, just top of mind.
Yeah, great advice. Me personally, I've got a Apple Watch, and I love that every hour it reminds me to get up, move, and also breathe. And I think that's really important, just to do the controlled breaths. It just helps you kind of like calm down, de-stress. And it's so great that it's something that you can wear on your wrist. I don't have it on right now, but I think, use those smart devices that you have. There are plenty of apps that will give you reminders. There are desktop notifications that I think can be really helpful to, kind of take that pause during the day. And I think that kind of goes well with our next question. This one is from Haley. She asked, you mentioned taking breaks during the workday. I know for many, breaks almost seem unheard of, as that we're so busy working from home and feel that we are tied to being online. What are some suggestions for breaking up the workday and almost helping relieve stress and resetting our minds for the rest of the day?
So I think this is an interesting conversation because it's almost like the way that we work completely changed in mid-March. I remember when I first started working, and I'm not going to give my age away, but people used to take smoking breaks. And whenever I was still going into the office at the beginning of the year, people would stop by our desks and have a chit-chat break, not for a long time, but for 5 minutes. And that was completely normal in the line of doing business. And I think that part of what's going on now is that that's not happening. We're either sitting at our kitchen table, sitting at our couches, or if we do have the luxury of having a home office, and we're heads down, sometimes getting straight out of bed, grabbing a coffee, and hovering over our laptops. So maintaining like some kind of sense of normalcy and just giving yourself that opportunity. Maybe you take your dog out, not on a long dog walk, but on a 10-minute dog walk, and set it on your calendar. Set a notification if you're not going to hold yourself accountable. I haven't been getting myself outside either. So when I know that I'm going to have like a second to breathe and take myself out of a spreadsheet, then I'll make myself do it.
Yeah, great advice. And if anyone has a dog that they want me to walk, hit me up on Twitter or email, and I will happily come over and play with your dog for a little bit. I would also recommend taking walking meetings. I think that is something that is also helpful. Many of you have, AirPods, earbuds, some sort of headphones. And if you're not directly leading the meeting with slide decks, it can be really helpful just to get outside, walk for 30 to 45 minutes during that call, kind of get your blood flowing a little bit. I think that is so important as well, to get exercise during the day. It's something that I've found helpful. And it's a little bit better sometimes than, just sitting on your couch or at your coffee table for the entire day. So try to actually get outside, get some fresh air. I know for many of you in Houston this week, the weather has been quite awful. So only do it during safe conditions, but just kind of keep that in mind. All right, I've got another question. This one is anonymous. Does your advocacy address substance abuse as a trigger, does your advocacy address substance abuse as a trigger for poor mental health? Many reports are that this is on the rise since the shutdown began.
It is on the rise since the shutdown began. And actually, it's often looked to as a negative coping mechanism for mental health. And it's one of the things that I speak about a lot because of my father, because he coped with his PTSD with alcohol, and that's ultimately what caused his passing. And so I share that story in a way to help people understand that if they seek care and use healthy coping mechanisms, like some of the things that we've referenced today, that they can survive their mental health issues and get through them. Now, with the other side of your question, are some of the substance abuse issues potentially causing mental health conditions? I do know that, drinking alcohol is a depressant, or it also triggers if you have an underlying condition. I know that I have severe anxiety, and if I have too many glasses of wine, I will wake up the next day. I like to call them the scaries. My doctor has told me it is just triggering your anxiety. So I do know that it's just making it worse. So, it's one with the other.
Yeah, definitely. If you do any sort of alcohol consumption, make sure to do it in moderation. Maybe, a glass of wine, sure. Don't drink a bottle of wine every day. That's probably not the best solution financially, and then also for, productivity as well. All right, I've got another question. What are some signs to look out for in yourself or coworkers that may be struggling with their mental health or wellness?
I think if anyone's behavior starts changing, if they begin behaving erratically, they start turning down social events, they're not spending time with their friends the same way that they were, if their eating habits have changed, if they're sleeping less, anything like that you notice, especially if anyone starts talking about suicide or not wanting to be here anymore. And we have the resources for the suicide crisis line to share at the end of the call. But that's something, if you notice that, you should immediately give them a call. You can call as a friend and immediately get them help. But as far as all the other ones, you can step in and talk to them and help them. You don't have to be a mental health professional. You can softly help them. You can say, what's going on? I've noticed a change. If they push back, all you have to do is be there. Sometimes just being present and being a support system and being a friend, like, hey, do you want to, well, I was going to say go to the movies, but we can't do that right. But like, hey, like, do you want to hang out? Or do you want to get a coffee? Or, if we're in quarantine, a virtual coffee, or can we have a call? Like, being there for someone is enough for them to know that they're not alone.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly important. That's been one of the cool things. We alluded to this earlier, but technology has been so critical, at least for me, during this time. Having a cell phone, being able to FaceTime with, friends, at all hours of the day. It's been great. That's, in a way, it seems that, we're almost more connected digitally now because of the pandemic, and that makes sense. But I hope that we can still maintain these connections when, life does return to normal, whether it's, in 2 months, 6 months, a year, whatever that timetable may be. But kind of on that technology front, I do know that, like, for me personally, I don't want to call it an addiction to social media, but I'm always on Twitter. If I'm watching a football game, I have to see, the latest commentary stats. If I'm watching a baseball game, I have to see the commentary and stats. But that's not always healthy, especially during times like this where we have just so much negativity going on in our society. It can be depressing just to scroll through your social media feeds. But as communicators, a lot of us deal with social media on a day-to-day basis. How can we kind of make time for ourselves to actually turn off social media, turn off work for just a little bit, just to kind of reset and maybe stay away from, some of that negativity?
Yeah, they say comparison is the thief of joy. And as a pageant competitor, we have a tendency to look at everyone else that we're competing against and compare ourselves. And so that's one thing that I always try to maintain, is to step away. Just trying to read a book, listen to music, go outside and walk your dog. Putting down the screen time is really important for our eyes, for our mental health, and just for our mental wellness. But also, there's a positive side to social media that I don't want to leave off the table. Hope for Invisible Wounds completely sits on social media. It sits on Facebook and Instagram, and it has allowed me to reach those 6,000 people every day and have a pretty big impact, not just, reaching them, but I've gotten a lot of really positive feedback from people and the lives that I've been able to touch with not just the resources, but the stories that we've shared. And so if you're going to be on social media, maybe you're not looking at the Instagram models who are photoshopped. Maybe you're looking at positive accounts that are promoting, things that are important, positive affirmations and hope.
Or just things that I think make you feel good. Like for me, I follow entirely too many dog accounts to the point that I start getting targeted ads for dog food when I don't even own a dog. It's
time for you to get one.
Yeah, it should be. But I do want to follow up on, the Hope for Invisible Wounds, because that is something that we mentioned at the top, but we didn't really go in depth on it. Tell us a little bit more about that organization, how it started, what its purpose is, and kind of the work that you've done.
So Hope for Invisible Wounds is an outreach initiative that I started about 3 years ago, and it provides tips and tools and resources through the Facebook account, and the Instagram account is kind of just positive affirmations. And then I also have a blog, and I share mental health posts, and that's where the stories of healing sit. So I kind of push out the stories of healing through all of that. And then I also, through Hope for Invisible Wounds, have partnered with large global charity organizations to kind of help have a larger impact, as well as that's where any kind of fundraising that I do gets donated back to them. I partnered with the World Federation for Mental Health to work with them to help implement suicide prevention plans worldwide. And that's the advocacy work that I was doing at the UN. And then I work as an advocate with the Global Emotional Intelligence organization, 6 Seconds. And then I also work with a local Virginia charity called Runway to Life. And what we do is raise money year round for service providers. So people who, work in restaurants or bars, so that they can be trained to identify people who are in suicide crisis and what they can do and how to get them help.
And again, we'll provide the links at the end, but never know that you're never alone. There are always resources out there. There are organizations, there's family, friends that can definitely help you get through the difficult time, whether it's, substance abuse, depression, anxiety, bipolar, so many different, segments of mental health. We do have a question that came in. And it's, what advice do you have for someone who's at an empath and is getting to the limit of being able to listen to or help others? This person said, I just can't take on the world's heavy right now, but that also makes me feel guilty for not being there for my friends and coworkers as much as they might be used to.
I mean, it sounds like someone who is ready to start talking to a mental health professional and kind of start unpacking the things that they're struggling with. It also is probably, you're potentially at a point where you could push back. Everyone has their limits, and you shouldn't have to take on everyone else's struggles. I've dealt with that myself. As someone who understands this world and empowers people a lot with like Hope for Invisible Wounds, when other people are struggling, they'll come to me, and what they don't understand is that I have my own struggles, and so sometimes you can get piled on, and I'm not a person who often tells people no. So I definitely understand where that question is coming from. But if you haven't sought care yet, I would definitely recommend reaching out, doing research, and finding someone who can help you. And if that's not an option financially, there are definitely some free options, and we can share those out.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, we'll share the resources after. We also had a question that was, will you share your panic attack prevention tip sheet with us? And I think the answer is yes. We'll send that tomorrow in an email. It'll include the links to the webinar. So if you missed it, you can go back and kind of use these resources. But Courtney, as a communications professional, you've got 14 years experience with a variety of different segments of the comms function. How have you been able to use your communications knowledge to kind of enhance the work that you're doing in the nonprofit space, and vice versa? How have you been able to use the work that you've done in the nonprofit space to maybe integrate that a little bit into what you do on a day-to-day role as a communicator?
So I think, to address the first part of the question, how I use my communications experience in the nonprofit space is it really helped me to be able to speak to this audience and understand how to not just share my story, but share other people's stories, and how to advocate for these other organizations that I've been an ambassador for. I'm essentially a volunteer PR professional for them, if anything. So I'm utilizing my skills and training in that way. In the other way, because I'm out there and I'm working with people that have gone through struggles, or I am learning so much about this field, when I'm sitting in this other seat as a professional at work, I have this empathy. I have a different mindset. I understand the stakeholder audiences. What doesn't matter what we're communicating about. I'm able to put myself in that seat a little bit better.
Yeah, I think empathy, I can't stress that enough, is so important. You have to actively listen to people if they are sharing these issues, even opinions. I think that this is something that we mentioned on the podcast a few weeks ago with Sam Chen, is that so many people now just don't want to have difficult conversations, right? I mean, so many people are narrow-minded, I hate to use that term, and just focused on one opinion and will not even listen to others. But I think that's what makes society great, is when you can actually open up, have discourse, share different ideas. You don't necessarily have to agree with them, but I think it's so important to listen, and especially listen when it comes to, our friends and family, coworkers that are, being impacted by mental health issues. All right, we've got another question. This one's from Haley. She asked, what's been one of your favorite highlights from your career, such as, a memorable accomplishment, personally fulfilling experience, or something else?
I think so. I'm going to talk about on the pageant side with Hope for Invisible Wounds. So I referenced that I was highlighted in Thrive Global for sharing my story as a shiro, and they actually brought us to Vegas. There were 6 people who were highlighted. The shiro campaign was women who have gone through significant struggles, and took that and turned their pain into power, and were able to impact large audiences in some way. And so that was with Hope for Invisible Wounds. and then they shot a documentary. And leading up to going out there, I tried to cancel my flight about 7 times. Might have had a couple of panic attacks. I packed my bag like 3 minutes before I had to leave for the airport. I just didn't want to go. I was really struggling with it. It was one thing to talk on the phone to a journalist, because that's what we do as PR professionals. It's another thing to sit there with 7 cameras on you, even though I'm in pageants and do this kind of thing. But it's raw, and it's my actual trauma, and it's not just me telling you guys a talking point that I tell judges or, that I'm used to saying. It's real deep. But I went. My aunt told me, go. It's an experience of a lifetime. You have to go. I went and I did it. And when I walked out of there, I felt so empowered. I felt like it was the same conversation that I had had with people that I helped them share their stories for the first time, even though I had told my story many times. And that was it. I'll never be able to explain it to anyone, but that's going to be, I don't know if I'll ever be able to top it.
Yeah. It's really cool when you have amazing experiences that impact you not only in the short term, but the long term. I think that's great. So Haley, hopefully that answered your question. Also, I see that Ellen shared a few resources in the chat for depression and bipolar support. Thank you for sharing that, Ellen. Also, I know that Alice shared some resources earlier, so thank you. We've got just a few minutes left, so if you have any last minute questions that you want to throw in, please feel free to drop them in the chat box. But Courtney, I think it's really important that we give people takeaways, and not only just resources, links, and so forth. But if you're giving advice to maybe someone that that is experiencing mental health issues for the first time, or maybe they're struggling and they need support, or maybe they're a communications professional and they're trying to develop a message that actually resonates with whether it's senior leaders or general staff. I know that's kind of a packed question, 3 separate questions, but what kind of advice would you give?
So I'm going to take that into 2 because I want to leave everyone with something. But I want to touch on safe messaging really quick because we skipped over it because we kind of jumped around a little bit. And we don't have that much time, so I'll just touch on it. And I think if you're developing any kind of mental health messaging or suicide prevention messaging, please do some research and we can share out some resources on safe messaging. But the way that we talk about mental health and suicide prevention can be triggering and can be stigmatizing. And not just in everyday language, but in how we report on it in the media and how we write about it in corporate language. So please be cognizant of that. And so then to answer the other part and what I would talk to someone about, what I would tell that 7-year-old girl who is struggling with being abused, this is a moment in time. Your life is potentially 90 plus years. And this isolation is a moment in time, and you're not alone, and you will get through it, and you will look back and you will realize that it was just a very brief moment, and we are here for you, and there are resources and there are tools, and you will make it.
Very powerful advice. You're not alone, just a moment in time. There are resources out there to help you get through this. I think it is great to see what companies are doing now to kind of lean in and embrace, these sensitive subjects now. I think it's absolutely powerful. But know that there are resources to help there, whether, they're paid resources, whether it's, professionals, whether it's work, whether it's an app on your iPhone or Android device, there are resources out there to help you. And I know that someone is always out there to listen to you, whether you don't think so or not. Just remember, you're not alone. All right, we've got another question from Haley. How can we help educate each other with learning how to be more empathetic, especially as we continue to navigate this unexpected time in our careers?
I mean, I think the number one thing you can do is to listen and to ask questions and to always be open to other people's opinions. I think that's the number one thing with empathy, is to hearing other people, and you don't have to agree, but you have to appreciate what they have to say.
All right, another question for you. as communicators, how can we identify triggers, and how can we kind of navigate some of those to make sure that we're more empathetic of those potential triggers?
I mean, everyone has different triggers with their mental health, and like depending upon what their traumas could be. There are specific ones with like suicide prevention, and we can provide out resources. I know that with like the pandemic and stuff, there's things that we've hit on that you know, we need to be cognizant of. Some of the things that I referenced with the safe messaging that I can reference right now would be like being cognizant of how we talk about it. Like we wouldn't want to use language such as like saying someone was crazy or psycho. I mean, I was trying to talk around that, but that's the type of stuff like that can actually like truly stigmatize. Calling someone, saying someone is bipolar versus saying someone has bipolar. That's the type of stuff that you would find when you start reading about safe messaging, and that can be triggering to someone who is suffering.
Great advice, and we'll try to provide those resources as well. So if you're developing any messaging around that, you have places to go. We've got another question, and I think this might be the last one. We've talked a lot about how to handle mental health in these times, but it seems to have been geared more toward those who have been able to keep their jobs. What advice do you have for those who have lost their livelihoods and are coping with the stress of survival on top of all these other stressors?
I think that the first thing I would say is to try to utilize some of the resources that we referenced when we were talking about the entrepreneurs. They have free mental health resources in the communities, peer support groups. Also, I would just say that trying to maintain a daily routine as much as possible, whether it's meditation, doing free workouts. A lot of the workout studios are doing free workouts. Anything that you can do to try to maintain some kind of sense of normalcy. Don't just lay in bed all day and watch Netflix. Get up and pretend like create your normal day. And maybe that's when you're working with the unemployment agency to get your unemployment. And maybe that's when you're applying for jobs and connecting and networking when you would have normally been working. And so that is how you're maintaining a sense of normalcy.
Yeah, and for those that are struggling with unemployment right now, it's the whole situation sucks. There's no easy way to put it. I know several people that have been impacted. Here at IABC Houston, we're trying to do everything we can to help. If you go to our website, iabchouston.com/career center, if you're looking for a job, send us your resume, send us a bio, send us your contact information. We'll put that up there. Also, I am trying my hardest to find every single comms role that's open in Houston and posting it there. I recently updated on June 23rd. We have 2 freelance jobs at a local church. So it's something that you can, it's not going to pay the bills, long-term, but it's something that I think can help on the short-term level. But also if you just want to talk to somebody, reach out to us, shoot us an email. Like, we'll be happy to get on the phone, try to help you out where we can, because at the end of the day, we are a community of communicators. We have to stick together, especially during these difficult times. I think that is what is going to help us get through this together. Courtney Phillips, thank you so much for joining this webinar. And for our listeners out there and the people watching on Zoom, Facebook, I dropped these in the chat, but want to give them to you again. The Samson National Health Helpline if provides 24/7 confidential assistance in finding local resources in mental health and substance abuse disorders. If you want to reach out to them, the number is 1-800-662-HELP. Also, the National Suicide Prevention Crisis Lifeline, which provides 24/7 confidential crisis counseling via phone and chat, is 1-800-273-8255. And Courtney, for anyone out there that wants to get in touch with you, maybe follow up on the work that you're doing, maybe they have a question that they wanted to ask but didn't want to ask it in a public setting, maybe they want to follow up with you that way, what is the best way for them to get in touch with you?
So I'm on Facebook and Instagram. You can find me at the Courtney Phillips and Hope for Invisible Wounds on Facebook. And then on Instagram, it is at Hope for Invisible Wounds.
Definitely follow Courtney on all of those platforms. And again, Courtney will be on the Business Communicators podcast this upcoming Wednesday. So if you want to win this Google Nest, leave us a 5-star review and a comment. Send the screen cap of that to podcast at iabchouston.com. We'll accept entries until, July 8th. And so we'll pick a winner that on July 9th. So thank you so much for yeah. I don't know.
Because I'm going to do it.
Thank you to everyone who joined today's conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your questions. It has been an absolute pleasure to serve as president of IABC Houston for the last year. And so Haley Ross, passing the baton over to you. Courtney Phillips, thank you so much for joining, and we'll talk soon.